My stepmother locked me out of my father's office. I was holding a box of his files and a court summons with my name on it. That's where this story ends. Let me tell you where it begins. My father built Harlow Freight from nothing. I mean that literally. He started with one truck, a folding table and a storage unit, and a cell phone he shared with my mother because they couldn't afford two plans. By the time I was 12, Harlow Freight had 14 trucks and a real office with a receptionist named Pat, who always kept butterscotch candies on her desk. By the time I was 22 and fresh out of a logistics degree, it had 31 trucks, 2 regional contracts, and my father's name on a building for the first time in his life. He called me the day I graduated. Not to congratulate me, well, that too, but mostly to ask when I was coming in. He needed someone who understood the software the new dispatchers were using. Someone he could trust with the books. I said I'd be there Monday. That was the best decision I ever made. It was also, indirectly, the beginning of everything falling apart. My mother passed when I was 9, pancreatic cancer, which is the kind that doesn't give you time to prepare. 1 month she was packing my lunch. 6 months later she was gone. My father held it together in the way that men of his generation hold things together, by working more, talking less, and never once crying in front of me that I saw. I respected him for it even when I was too young to understand it. He met my stepmother about 4 years later. I'll call her what she always insisted I call her by her first name, Loretta. She came with 2 things, a bright smile that didn't reach her eyes, and a son named Wesley who was 3 years older than me and had never held a job longer than 4 months in his life. I want to be fair here. In the beginning, Loretta wasn't cruel. She was distant, maybe a little cold, but she wasn't what she later became. I think she was testing the ground, seeing how much my father would overlook. And my father, who was lonely in a way he'd never say out loud, overlooked quite a lot. Wesley was another story. From day one, Wesley looked at Harlow Freight the way certain people look at things they didn't earn, with a kind of lazy possessiveness. Like ownership was simply a matter of waiting long enough. He'd come by the office sometimes, never to work, always to stop in. He'd sit in the break room and eat the food meant for staff. He'd make comments about the trucks. That one looks old, shouldn't you upgrade? As if he had any stake in the capital expenditure decisions of a company he'd never contributed a single hour to. My father thought Wesley just needed direction. That was my father's word, direction. He believed, genuinely, that most people who failed to thrive just hadn't been pointed the right way yet. So he pointed Wesley toward me. He asked me, not told me, asked me, which is how I knew it mattered to him. If Wesley could shadow me for a while, learn the dispatch side, maybe work into a coordinator role. I said yes because my father asked me to, and because I thought, maybe I'm being unfair. Maybe Wesley will surprise me. Wesley did not surprise me. Wesley showed up 3 days out of 5, spent half his time on his phone, and on the one occasion I tried to walk him through our routing software. He looked at me with the particular blankness of someone who has decided in advance that they will not be retaining this information. After 2 months, I told my father honestly that Wesley wasn't engaging with the work. My father nodded slowly in that way he had. He said he talked to him. I don't know what that conversation looked like. What I know is that after it happened, Loretta stopped being distant and started being something else. Little things at first. She'd schedule family dinners on nights I'd mentioned having plans, then act wounded when I couldn't make it. She'd tell my father, I found out later, that I seemed withdrawn, that she was worried about me, that maybe I was struggling with something. She was building a narrative about me before I even knew there was a story being told. Then my father had his first heart attack. It was minor. That's what the doctors called it. A minor cardiac event, which is a phrase designed to make something terrifying sound manageable. He was in the hospital for 4 days. He came home with a list of restrictions and a new awareness of his own mortality that changed him in ways I'm still understanding. He started talking about the business differently, about the future, about what happened to things when the person who built them wasn't there anymore. I thought those conversations were between us. I didn't know Loretta was having parallel conversations with him in the evenings, in the quiet of their bedroom, in the particular intimacy that a spouse has access to, that a child never does. About 6 months after his heart attack, my father called me into his office and told me he'd updated his estate documents. He said he wanted everything formalized, that the lawyer had drawn up new paperwork, that there was a revised operating agreement for Harlow Freight. He told me he was splitting ownership of the company, 50% to me, 50% to Wesley. I remember the feeling. It wasn't quite anger. It was more like the floor had shifted 2 inches to the left, and I was recalibrating my balance. I asked him, as calmly as I could manage, what Wesley had done to merit half of a company he'd never worked for. My father said Wesley was family now, that he wanted peace, that he was tired. I didn't fight it then. I should have. I didn't. I signed the revised operating agreement. I watched Loretta's expression at dinner that night, that small, satisfied arrangement of her face that she thought I wasn't reading. I told myself it didn't matter. The company would still run the same way. My father was still here. We'd figure it out. Then my father had his second heart attack 14 months later. This one was not minor. He survived. But the recovery was long and hard, and in the months that followed, my father was not. And I want to say this carefully, because I love him. He was not always tracking everything clearly. The medications affected his memory, his concentration. He'd ask me the same questions twice in one conversation and not realize it. He'd sign things Loretta put in front of him without reading them the way he used to read everything. I noticed. I started paying closer attention. Wesley had stopped even pretending to be interested in the work. He'd gotten his name on the operating agreement, and that, apparently, was enough. He'd show up occasionally, make some noise about his company, and leave. Loretta had started sitting in on supplier calls she had no business being on, and asking questions designed to make it seem like she was involved in operations she'd never touched. And then one Thursday morning, I came into the office and found a letter on my desk. It was from a lawyer I didn't recognize. It informed me that effective immediately, the operating agreement for Harlow Freight LLC had been amended. Per the updated document, signed by both majority stakeholders, I was being transitioned out of my operational role. My ownership stake was being bought out at a valuation I can only describe as insulting. I had 30 days to vacate my office and turn over access to company systems. Both majority stakeholders. The document listed 2 signatures, my father's and Wesley's. I sat in my chair for a long time, long enough that Pat knocked on my door and asked if I was okay. And I told her I was fine. And she looked at me the way people look at you when they don't believe you, but respect you enough not to push. Then I picked up the letter and drove to my father's house. Loretta answered the door. My father, she told me, was resting. He wasn't to be disturbed. She said it pleasantly, the way you say things when you know you're holding every card. I told her I needed to see him. She said perhaps tomorrow would be better. I told her I had a legal document with his signature on it that I needed to discuss. She smiled, actually smiled, and said she was sure everything would make sense once I had time to process it. I left. But I didn't go home. I went to my car and I sat there and I made a list, not an emotional list, a practical one. What did I actually know? What did I need to find out? The first thing I needed was a copy of the amended operating agreement. The letter referenced it but didn't include it. I called the lawyer whose name was on the letter and identified myself. He said he couldn't discuss the matter with me directly, that I should retain my own counsel. I thanked him and hung up. I called an attorney I knew, a woman who had done some contract work for Harlow Freight years earlier, sharp and no nonsense. The kind of lawyer who doesn't use 3 words when 2 will do. I'll call her my attorney. She told me to get her everything I could. The amended operating agreement, when I finally obtained a copy through proper channels, had 3 things wrong with it. The first was the date. The document was dated 6 weeks earlier. I cross-referenced my calendar. 6 weeks earlier, my father had been in the middle of a follow-up treatment protocol that required him to come in for appointments 3 days a week. I had driven him to 2 of those appointments myself. The second was his signature. I had looked at my father's signature my entire life. It was distinctive, a capital H that swooped low before coming back up, a particular flourish on the last letter. The signature on this document had the shape of it, but it was too even. My father's hands shook slightly now, a side effect of one of his medications. The signature on the document did not shake. The third was the notarization. Every document like this needs a notary. The seal on this one belonged to a notary public, whose information I tracked down in about 20 minutes of online searching. Her office was in a suburb 40 minutes away. She had no connection to Loretta or Wesley that I could find. But notaries, as I was about to learn, keep records. Every notary public is required by law to maintain a journal of every document they notarize. Date, time, names, signatures of the people who appeared before them. It's not optional. It's not informal. It's a legal record. My attorney sent a formal request for the notary's journal entry corresponding to the date on the amended operating agreement. The notary, to her credit, responded quickly. Her journal entry for that date showed one document notarized at 2014 in the afternoon. It was not the Harlow Freight operating agreement. It was a real estate document for a completely different client. The Harlow Freight document appeared in her records as notarized 2 days later, and the signature in her journal, the signature of the person who appeared before her, was not my father's name. It was Wesley's. Wesley had somehow presented himself for notarization in place of my father. Whether he'd misrepresented himself, whether the notary had been negligent, whether something else entirely had happened. That was for the lawyers and potentially law enforcement to work out. What I knew was that the document purporting to remove me from my own family's company had a fraudulent notarization and a signature that didn't match my father's current handwriting. I want to tell you I felt triumphant in that moment. I didn't. I felt sick, because to pursue this meant opening up everything. My father's diminished capacity, Loretta's manipulation, Wesley's fraud, in a legal proceeding. It meant the company my father built with one truck and a folding table becoming a matter of public record and courtroom arguments. But I thought about that letter on my desk. The insulting buyout figure. Loretta's smile at the door. I thought about the 16 people who worked for Harlow Freight and what happened to a company when the people running it were only interested in what they could extract from it. I thought about my father, who didn't know, couldn't know, in his current state, what was being done in his name. I made my decision. My attorney filed for an emergency injunction to halt the operating agreement amendment pending investigation of the notarization irregularities. She also filed a formal complaint with the state's notary oversight body. And she drafted a letter to be hand-delivered to the lawyer who'd sent me the original termination notice, outlining what we had found and what we intended to do with it. The morning after the filing, I went back to my father's house. This time, I didn't knock. I had a key. My father had given me 1 year ago, and no one had asked for it back. I walked in at 8 in the morning, while Loretta was still upstairs, and I sat down at the kitchen table with my father. He looked at me. For a moment, I was scared. Scared that his mind would be somewhere else. That the person who taught me to read a freight manifest and balance a ledger and always know what your truck was carrying wouldn't be fully there. He said my name. He said, "You look like something happened." I told him everything. I put the documents on the table in front of him and I talked and he listened. And about halfway through, I saw something shift in his face. Not confusion, but recognition. A slow, terrible recognition of someone who has let themselves be comfortable and is realizing in real time what that comfort cost. He said, "I never signed that." He said it quietly, not like a question. I said, "I know." He picked up the amended operating agreement and looked at his supposed signature for a long time. Then he looked at me and he said, "I need to call my lawyer." His lawyer. Not Loretta's. Not the firm Wesley had apparently been using. His own attorney, who had drawn up the original company documents 15 years ago, and who was, thank God, still practicing. I stayed at that table while he made the call. I could hear Loretta moving around upstairs. I thought about saying something to her. I decided against it. Some conversations are better had after the legal record is clear. My father's attorney came to the house that afternoon. My attorney joined by video call. The evidence was laid out. My father, whatever the medications had taken from his concentration, had not lost his ability to understand what had been done to him when it was explained plainly and in front of a lawyer he trusted. He authorized his attorney to challenge the amended operating agreement in full. The injunction was granted 2 days later. The investigation that followed is still ongoing, and I'm not going to detail everything here because some of it involves legal proceedings I'm not supposed to discuss. What I can tell you is that Wesley is no longer described as a co-owner of anything connected to Harlow Freight. Loretta retained a separate attorney and is having a series of conversations that, from what I'm told, she is not enjoying. My father is still recovering. Some days are better than others. He has a caregiver now, someone whose job it is to be with him, and Loretta's access to his finances has been reviewed and restructured. I visit twice a week. We don't talk about Loretta or Wesley much. We talk about the company, about the drivers he likes, about whether we should expand the regional contract or hold steady for another year. Last week, he told me he was proud of me. He said it the way people say things they mean but don't have a habit of saying, a little stolted, a little abrupt, like he'd been holding it and finally just put it down. I said I knew. I'm still in my office. Pat still has butterscotch candies on her desk. The trucks still run. I didn't want to be the person who fights his own family in a legal proceeding. I didn't want any of this, but I learned something in those weeks with the documents and the notary records and the depositions. The people who take advantage of someone's trust are always counting on you being too tired or too heartbroken or too conflict-averse to look closely. They count on you absorbing the blow and walking away. I looked closely. Before I let you go, if any part of this story sounds like your story, I want you to know that the record exists. The timestamps exist. The journal entries exist. The truth has a way of sitting very still and waiting for someone to come look for it. And if you have someone in your life who is being taken advantage of, an aging parent, someone whose clarity comes and goes, please pay attention. Please look at what's being put in front of them to sign. Please be the person who shows up at the kitchen table at 8 in the morning and stays until the call is made. That's all I've got today. If this reached you, drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. I read every single one. I've thought a lot about why it took me as long as it did to look closely. The honest answer is that I didn't want to see it. There's a kind of comfort in believing the people around you are operating in good faith, even when the evidence starts to suggest otherwise. It's not naivety exactly. It's more like a choice you make every morning to keep the peace, to not be the person who causes the conflict, to tell yourself that things will work themselves out. They don't work themselves out. I know that now. What Loretta and Wesley built wasn't complicated. It was just patient. They found a man who was tired and unwell and loved his family. And they used that love as a door they could walk through whenever they wanted. Every document, every signature, every quiet conversation in a bedroom I wasn't in. None of it was accidental. It was a structure, built piece by piece, designed to look like family and function like a trap. And the thing about a structure like that is it only holds as long as nobody examines it too carefully. The notary journal. The timestamps. The signature that didn't shake the way my father's hands shook. The truth was sitting there the whole time, perfectly still, waiting for someone to come look. I think about my father at that kitchen table, the way he looked at his own supposed signature, and said I never signed that. Not like a question, just a statement. Quiet and certain. Whatever those months of medication and fatigue had softened in him, his integrity wasn't one of them. He knew his own name. He knew what he had and hadn't agreed to. That's the thing about character. It doesn't disappear when things get hard. It just gets harder to see through everything piled on top of it. I'm not going to pretend I handled all of this perfectly. There were weeks where I second-guessed myself constantly, where I wondered if I was being paranoid, if I was making the family situation worse, if the cost of fighting was higher than the cost of walking away. Those are real questions, and I don't think it's weak to ask them, but I kept coming back to the same answer. 16 people worked for Harlow Freight. My father built something real, and what was being done to it, and to him, was wrong. You can know something is wrong and still be afraid to act on it. Those two things aren't contradictory. What matters is what you do with the fear. I showed up. I got the documents. I sat at the table. I made the call. None of that is dramatic. It's just work. The quiet, unglamorous work of paying attention and following through. And if there's anything I'd pass on from all of this, it's that. The people who count on you to fold are counting on one specific thing, that you'll decide it's too hard to look closely, that the paperwork will seem like too much, that the discomfort of confronting them will outweigh the cost of letting it go. Don't let it go. Look closely. The record exists. The timestamps exist. The truth is more durable than the people who try to bury it.